The auctioneer's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a rusty blade, and Vincent Norwood felt his stomach turn as he realized what kind of sale was taking place on the wooden platform ahead. He had ridden into Golden, Colorado, expecting to find supplies for his ranch and maybe a decent meal, but instead, he found himself frozen in the middle of the dusty street, staring at something that made his blood run cold. A young woman stood on that platform with her wrists bound, her dress torn at the shoulder, and her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd as though she could will herself to disappear. The year was 1873, and Vincent had seen plenty of ugliness in his 30 years of life, but this particular brand of cruelty hit him differently. The men gathered around the platform were the usual collection of miners, drifters, and ranch hands with more money than morals. They shouted numbers like they were bidding on livestock, and the auctioneer encouraged them with practiced enthusiasm. Vincent dismounted from his horse and pushed his way closer, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. The woman on the platform couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that hung loose around her shoulders, and a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't hollow with exhaustion and fear. "Do I hear 300?" the auctioneer called out. "This here is prime merchandise, gentlemen. Young, strong, and she can cook and clean. Got her papers right here showing she owes a debt to the Cartwright Mining Company, and whoever buys that debt gets himself a worker for however long it takes to pay it off." Vincent's hands curled into fists. Debt bondage. It was legal in some territories, barely, and it was one of the vilest practices he had ever encountered. A man could claim someone owed him money and then sell that debt to another person, effectively selling a human being. The woman on the platform had probably never owed anyone a cent, but some corrupt company official had manufactured paperwork to make it look legitimate. 350, a bearded man near the front shouted. 400, another voice called from Vincent's left. The woman's eyes flickered briefly toward the crowd, and Vincent caught a glimpse of the desperation there. She was trying so hard to be brave, to keep her chin up, but he could see the way her hands trembled. Something in his chest cracked open, some feeling he couldn't quite name but that demanded action. $1,000, Vincent heard himself say, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. Every head turned to look at him. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up nearly to his hairline. $1,000 was more money than most of these men would see in 2 years of hard work. It was also nearly every cent Vincent had managed to save from 3 years of careful ranch management. "Did you say 1,000, sir?" the auctioneer asked, unable to hide his greedy smile. "I did. Cash money, right now." The other bidders grumbled and cursed, but none of them could match that offer. Vincent pulled the thick envelope from his inside vest pocket and walked up to the platform. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands stayed steady as he counted out the bills. The auctioneer snatched them up and made a great show of verifying each one before producing the so-called debt papers and handing them over. "Pleasure doing business with you, mister. She's all yours." Vincent took the papers without looking at them and climbed up onto the platform. The woman finally looked directly at him, and he saw raw terror flash across her face. She took a step backward, but there was nowhere to go. He held up both hands, palms out, and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to get you out of here, and then I'm going to burn these papers. You have my word." She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. He supposed that in a way he was. Men who bought women at auctions didn't typically offer them freedom in the next breath. Vincent pulled his knife from his belt and she flinched, but he just cut through the ropes binding her wrists with one quick motion. The hemp fell away, leaving angry red marks on her skin. "Can you ride a horse?" he asked. She nodded slowly, still watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. Good. Come with me. He helped her down from the platform, very aware of all the eyes following them. Some of the men looked angry that they had been outbid. Others looked curious. Vincent kept himself between the woman and the crowd as they walked toward his horse. She moved stiffly, like someone who had been standing in one position for too long, or maybe like someone who had been hurt and was trying not to show it. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, stood where Vincent had left him. Vincent retrieved a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to the woman. She hesitated, then took it and drank deeply. He gave her a moment to compose herself before speaking again. "What's your name?" "Laura," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, probably from thirst. "Laura Bennett." "I'm Vincent Norwood. I have a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. You're welcome to stay there as long as you need to figure out what you want to do next. No obligations, no debt, no strings attached." She looked at him like he had just claimed the sky was green. "Why would you do that? Why would you spend all that money just to let me go?" "Because what was happening back there was wrong, and I had the means to stop it." Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. "I don't understand." "You don't have to understand. You just have to decide if you want to come with me, or if you'd rather I help you get to somewhere else. Denver, maybe, or back east if you have family there." She glanced back at the dispersing crowd, at the auctioneer counting his money, at the men who had been bidding on her like she was a piece of furniture. Her jaw set in a hard line. "I'll come with you, at least until I can figure out what to do." Vincent nodded and mounted Copper, then reached down to help Laura up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, and after a moment's hesitation, wrapped her arms around Vincent's waist to keep her balance. He could feel how thin she was through the worn fabric of her dress, could feel the way she held herself rigid as though afraid to take up too much space. They rode out of Golden in silence, leaving behind the noise and dust of the town. The mountains rose up on either side of the valley, their peaks still holding patches of snow even though it was late June. The air smelled like pine and sage, and gradually, Vincent felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders. Laura remained quiet behind him, but as they put more distance between themselves and the auction, he felt her grip relax slightly. His ranch came into view after about 45 minutes of riding. It wasn't much to look at, just a small main house with a covered porch, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and a few fenced pastures where his cattle grazed. But it was his, bought and paid for with honest work, and he took pride in every worn board and every fence post he had set with his own hands. Vincent dismounted and helped Laura down. She swayed slightly when her feet hit the ground, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes and the way her dress hung on her frame. She looked like she hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning. Bread and water." Vincent bit back a curse. "Come inside, I'll make us some food." The inside of the house was simple but clean. There was a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and 2 bedrooms, one of which Vincent used mainly for storage. He guided Laura to a chair at the wooden table and set about making a meal. He had sourdough bread from town, smoked ham, cheese, and eggs from his chickens. It wasn't fancy, but it was substantial. Laura sat very still in the chair, her hands folded in her lap, watching him work. Vincent was used to doing his own cooking, and he moved efficiently around the small kitchen. He sliced bread and ham, fried eggs in bacon grease, and poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot that was perpetually warming on the stove. When he set the plate in front of Laura, she stared at it like it might vanish if she looked away. "Go ahead," he said gently. "Eat as much as you want." She picked up the fork with a trembling hand and took a small bite of egg. Then another. Then she was eating steadily, not frantically but with the focused intensity of someone who had been truly hungry. Vincent ate his own food and tried not to stare. He had so many questions, but he figured she would tell him what she wanted him to know when she was ready. When Laura finally pushed her empty plate away, some color had returned to her face. She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup and met Vincent's eyes across the table. "Thank you. For the food and for everything else. I still don't understand why you did it, but thank you. You're welcome." Vincent pulled the debt papers from his pocket and walked over to the fireplace. He tossed them into the flames and watched them blacken and curl. "There. That's done." Laura's eyes widened as she watched the papers burn. "Just like that, just like that. As far as I'm concerned, you never owed anyone anything." He returned to the table and sat down. "If you want to talk about how you ended up on that auction block, I'll listen. If you don't, that's fine too." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. Then she started talking, and once she started, the words poured out like water from a broken dam. She had been traveling west with her father 2 months ago, she said. He was a carpenter looking for work in the mining towns. They had stopped in Golden, and her father had gotten sick. Really sick, with a fever that wouldn't break. The local doctor had charged them for treatment, then charged them for the medicine, then charged them for the room where her father died 3 weeks later. "I didn't have enough money to pay the bill," Laura said, her voice flat. "The doctor said I could work it off cleaning the clinic and doing laundry. I said yes, because I didn't know what else to do. But then he sold my debt to the Cartwright Mining Company, and they added all these fees and interest charges until suddenly I owed 3 times what my father's treatment had cost. They said it would take me 5 years of work to pay it off. But I heard the men talking, heard them say that girls who went to work for Cartwright never came back." Vincent's jaw tightened. He had heard stories about the mining company, about how they treated their workers like disposable equipment. "So they decided to sell your debt instead." "The foreman said I was too skinny to work in the camps anyway. He said I would be more useful to someone who needed a house servant." She laughed bitterly. "He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. I'm sorry that happened to you. Your father, too." Laura's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He was a good man. He didn't deserve to die in a strange town, and I didn't even have enough money to give him a proper burial. They put him in the pauper's field." Vincent reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was a bold gesture, maybe too bold, but he couldn't stop himself. "You did the best you could under impossible circumstances. That's all anyone can do." She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she turned it over so their palms were touching, and she squeezed his fingers like she was holding onto a lifeline. They sat like that for several long minutes, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Finally, Laura pulled her hand back and wiped at her eyes. "I should probably clean up these dishes, to earn my keep." "You don't have to earn anything. But if washing dishes makes you feel better, go ahead." She stood and started gathering the plates. Vincent watched her move around his kitchen, and he felt something shift in his chest. He had been living alone for 3 years, ever since he bought this ranch. He had gotten used to the solitude, had even convinced himself that he preferred it. But watching Laura in his home, even under these terrible circumstances, made him realize how lonely he had been. He needed to be careful, though. She had just been through a trauma, and the last thing she needed was him developing feelings that she might feel obligated to return. He was going to have to keep his distance, treat her with respect and nothing more, and let her heal in her own time. That resolution lasted approximately 12 hours. The next morning, Vincent woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He pulled on his clothes and walked into the main room to find Laura at the stove, cooking breakfast. She had changed into one of his old shirts, which hung nearly to her knees, and she had pulled her dark hair back into a braid. She looked young and vulnerable and absolutely beautiful. "Good morning," she said when she noticed him. "I hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I might as well make myself useful." "I don't mind at all. It smells great." They ate together, and then Vincent went out to tend to his cattle and horses. He had about 30 head of cattle and 4 horses, including Copper. It was a modest operation, but it kept him fed and clothed. Laura surprised him by following him out to the barn. "Can I help?" she asked. "You don't have to, I know, but I want to." So Vincent taught her how to feed the horses and how to check their hooves for stones. She was a quick learner, attentive and careful with the animals. The horses seemed to like her immediately, especially Copper, who nuzzled at her pockets looking for treats. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Vincent would do the heavy work around the ranch, and Laura would help where she could. She cooked meals that were far better than anything Vincent had managed on his own, and she mended his clothes and cleaned the house without being asked. But more than that, they talked. They talked while they worked, while they ate, while they sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set behind the mountains. Vincent learned that Laura had grown up in Ohio, that her mother had died when she was 10, that she loved reading but rarely got the chance to do it. Laura learned that Vincent had served in the cavalry during the Civil War, that he had come west to escape the memories, that he had always wanted a place of his own where he could live quietly and hurt no one. "You're a good man, Vincent Norwood," Laura said one evening about a week after he had brought her home. They were sitting on the porch steps, and the fireflies were just starting to come out. "I don't think you realize how rare that is. I'm just doing what anyone decent would do." "No. Most men wouldn't have spent their savings to free a stranger. Most men wouldn't have offered respect and safety without expecting something in return." Vincent looked at her, at the way the fading light caught in her dark hair and made her eyes seem almost luminous. He wanted to tell her that he was starting to think of her as more than a stranger, that every day he spent with her made him want to spend another day and another after that. But he kept those thoughts to himself. "You're not a stranger anymore," he said instead. "You're my friend." Laura smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her whole face, made her look younger and lighter. "Friends," she repeated. "I like that." 2 weeks after Laura arrived at the ranch, Vincent rode into Golden to buy supplies. Laura stayed behind, partly because she wasn't ready to face the town again and partly because someone needed to watch over the ranch. Vincent made his purchases quickly, buying flour and sugar and ammunition and a few other necessities. He was loading everything onto Copper when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Well, if it isn't the man who ruined my sale." Vincent turned to see the auctioneer from the platform, a greasy little man named Silas Cobb. Behind him stood 2 larger men who were clearly meant to be intimidating. Vincent straightened to his full height, which was considerable, and met Cobb's eyes without flinching. "I didn't ruin anything. I paid your asking price. You paid too much, and you made the rest of us look bad. I've had complaints from the Cartwright Mining Company. They're saying you interfered with legal business. What happened on that platform wasn't legal in any moral sense, and you know it. If Cartwright has a problem with me, they can take it up with the territorial marshal." Cobb's face reddened. "That girl was property, fair and square. If you've got her working your ranch, you owe Cartwright a cut of her wages. She doesn't owe Cartwright anything, and neither do I. The debt papers are ash. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." Vincent turned back to Copper, but one of the large men grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. Vincent's fist connected with the man's jaw before he had time to think about it. The man staggered backward, and his companion lunged forward. Vincent sidestepped and used the man's momentum to send him crashing into a water trough. Cobb backed up, his eyes wide. "You're going to regret this, Norwood. Cartwright doesn't forget." "Neither do I," Vincent said quietly. "And I remember exactly what you did to Laura. You stay away from her and you stay away from my ranch. Are we clear?" Cobb nodded jerkily and scrambled away, his two companions limping after him. Vincent watched them go, his heart pounding. He had made enemies today, and Cartwright Mining Company was not an organization to trifle with. But he couldn't bring himself to regret standing up to them. Some things were worth fighting for. He rode back to the ranch faster than usual, suddenly anxious to make sure Laura was safe. He found her hanging laundry on the line behind the house, humming softly to herself. When she saw him, her face lit up and Vincent felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "You're back early," she said. "Ran into some trouble in town. Nothing serious, but I need to tell you about it." He explained the confrontation with Cobb while they walked back to the house. Laura listened carefully, and he saw her expression grow troubled. "Maybe I should leave," she said when he finished. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "You're not bringing trouble. Cobb and Cartwright are bringing trouble, and I'm not going to let them chase you away." "You're safe here, Laura. I'll make sure of it." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for everything." Vincent returned the embrace carefully, very aware of how small she felt in his arms and how right it felt to hold her. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, and she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. "I should finish the laundry," she said. "I should check the fence line in the north pasture." They separated and went about their tasks, but Vincent couldn't stop thinking about that hug, about the way Laura had felt pressed against him. He was in trouble, he realized. He was falling for her, despite all his resolutions to keep his distance, and he had no idea if she felt the same way. The answer came 3 nights later. Vincent was in the barn checking on one of his horses who had seemed off earlier in the day. It was late, well past midnight, and he hadn't expected anyone else to be awake. But Laura appeared in the barn doorway, wrapped in a quilt and looking worried. "I saw the light and thought something might be wrong," she said. "Just keeping an eye on Daisy here. I think she might have colic." Laura came closer and looked at the mare, who was indeed showing signs of discomfort. "What can we do?" "Walk her. Keep her moving so her gut doesn't twist." So they walked Daisy around the inside of the barn for the better part of an hour, taking turns leading the mare and talking quietly to keep her calm. Finally, Daisy's breathing eased, and she seemed more comfortable. Vincent settled her back in her stall with fresh water and a little hay. "I think she'll be all right now," he said. "You're good with animals, they trust you. Animals are easier to understand than people," Laura smiled. "Is that why you live out here alone?" "I didn't choose to live alone, I just chose to live somewhere quiet. There's a difference." "And now you're not alone anymore." "No, now I'm not." They stood very close together in the dim barn, the only light coming from the lantern Vincent had hung on a hook. Laura reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "I think about that day in town," she said softly. "When you climbed up on that platform, I thought you were just another man who wanted to own me. But then you cut the ropes and promised to set me free, and I didn't believe you. I couldn't believe anyone would do something like that without wanting something in return. I told you I don't want anything. I know. That's what makes you different." She moved closer and Vincent could smell the lavender soap she used in her hair. "But what if I want something? What if I want this?" She kissed him then, soft and tentative, and Vincent's entire world narrowed down to the feeling of her lips against his. He kissed her back carefully, giving her every chance to change her mind and pull away. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made Vincent's knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Laura, I need you to be sure about this. You've been through so much, and I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. I don't feel like I owe you. I feel like I'm falling in love with you, and it scares me and excites me, and I don't want to fight it anymore." Vincent's heart nearly stopped. "You're falling in love with me?" "Yes. Are you angry?" "Angry? Laura, I've been falling in love with you since the day I brought you home. I just didn't think I had the right to tell you." She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "You're the most honorable man I've ever met, Vincent Norwood. And I'm done wasting time being scared. Life is too short and too uncertain." He kissed her again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. This was a kiss full of promise and heat and hope for a future together. When they finally made their way back to the house, hand in hand under the stars, Vincent felt like he was walking on air. The next few weeks were the happiest of Vincent's life. He and Laura fell into their routines with the added dimension of being openly affectionate with each other. They stole kisses while doing chores, held hands at the dinner table, and spent long evenings on the porch talking about their dreams. Laura told him she had always wanted to learn to read better, so Vincent started teaching her from the handful of books he owned. She was a dedicated student, and her face would light up with pride every time she successfully read a new passage. Vincent told her about his plans to expand the ranch, maybe add some pigs and chickens beyond the few he already had, maybe build a bigger barn. Laura listened and offered suggestions, and it felt so natural to plan a future together that Vincent sometimes forgot they hadn't known each other for very long. But their happiness was interrupted one afternoon in late July when 3 riders approached the ranch. Vincent was working on repairing the barn door when he saw them coming. Something about the way they rode, all together in a tight formation, set off alarm bells in his head. "Laura," he called toward the house, "go inside and stay there." She appeared in the doorway, saw the riders, and her face went pale. But she nodded and retreated into the house. Vincent walked out to meet the visitors, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. The 3 men dismounted. 2 of them were clearly hired muscle, all broad shoulders and mean eyes. The third was older, well-dressed in a suit that marked him as someone with money and authority. He smiled at Vincent, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Vincent Norwood?" the man asked. "That's right. Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Cartwright. I believe you've heard of me." Vincent kept his expression neutral. "I've heard of your mining company. Then you know I'm a reasonable man who values fair business dealings. I'm here about a matter of stolen property." "I haven't stolen anything from you or anyone else." "I beg to differ. You purchased a debt contract for a woman named Laura Bennett, and according to my information, you destroyed that contract instead of honoring it. That makes you complicit in her theft of services." "Laura doesn't owe you or your company anything. That debt was manufactured, and you know it." Cartwright's smile thinned. "I have documentation that says otherwise, documentation that would hold up in a territorial court, but I'm willing to be reasonable. Return the girl to me, and I'll forget this whole unpleasant incident. She's not property to be returned. She's a free woman, and she's staying right here." "I was afraid you'd say that." Cartwright nodded to his 2 companions. "Search the house. Bring her out." The 2 men started toward the house, and Vincent drew his revolver in one smooth motion. "That's far enough." Everyone froze. Cartwright's expression hardened. "You're going to shoot us over some woman you barely know. I'll defend my home and the people in it against anyone who threatens them. That includes you and your thugs. Now get off my land." For a long moment nobody moved. Then Cartwright laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Norwood. My company owns half this territory. I could make your life very difficult. You could try." "But I fought in the war, Mr. Cartwright. I've faced worse than you and lived to tell about it, so I'll ask you one more time. Get off my land." Cartwright stared at him, clearly unused to being defied. Then he turned and remounted his horse. His two companions did the same, though they looked disappointed not to have gotten to use their fists. "This isn't over," Cartwright said. "I always collect what's owed to me. There's nothing owed, but if you come back here, make sure you bring the territorial marshal with you. Because without a legal warrant, you're just trespassing, and in these parts, a man has the right to defend his property." Cartwright's face flushed with anger, but he wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. Vincent kept his gun drawn until they were out of sight, then he holstered it and went to the house. Laura was standing just inside the door, her face white as a sheet. "I heard everything. Vincent, I'm so sorry. I've brought you nothing but trouble. Stop that." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "You haven't brought me trouble. You've brought me joy and purpose and love. Cartwright is the one causing trouble, and I'm not going to let him win. But he's powerful. He really could make things difficult for you. Let him try. I'm not going to hand you over to a man who wants to treat you like a slave. I'd rather lose everything I own than do that." Laura pulled back and looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. You deserve every good thing in this world, and I'm going to make sure you get them." He kissed her fiercely, and she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a chaotic world. When they finally separated, Vincent made a decision. "We need to go see the territorial marshal. If I'm going to use the law as a shield, I need to make sure it's on our side." "You think he'll help us?" "Only one way to find out." The next morning they rode together into Golden. Vincent had considered making Laura stay at the ranch, but she insisted on coming, and he understood why. She was tired of hiding, tired of feeling like a hunted animal. She wanted to stand up for herself, and he respected that. The territorial marshal's office was in a small building near the center of town. Marshal Henry Wade was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened carefully as Vincent explained the situation, occasionally glancing at Laura, who sat straight-backed in her chair and met his gaze without flinching. "You burned the debt papers?" Wade asked when Vincent finished. "I did. They were fraudulent from the start. Laura's father died owing a doctor bill, and somehow that turned into a contract with a mining company that kept adding fees until the debt was impossible to pay off." "That's a common enough scam," Wade admitted. "Cartwright's company has been accused of it before, but nothing's ever stuck. People are too afraid to testify against him." "I'm not afraid," Laura said quietly. "I'll testify. I'll tell anyone who'll listen what they did to me." Wade studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you would, Miss Bennett, and that's admirable. But here's the problem. Even if the debt was fraudulent, Mr. Norwood did destroy a legal document. Cartwright could argue that he's owed compensation for that." "How much compensation?" Vincent asked. "Hard to say. Probably whatever he paid at the original auction, plus interest and fees." Vincent did some quick mental math. "So he'd want more than I paid in the first place, most likely. And if I refuse to pay, then it goes to court, which could take months and cost you more in legal fees than the debt itself." Laura made a small, distressed sound. Vincent reached over and took her hand. "There has to be another way." Wade leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. "There might be. The debt was in Laura's name, right? It was her responsibility, at least according to the paperwork. Yes, Laura said. That's what they told me. Well, if you were to marry, any personal debts would be absorbed into your husband's household. Cartwright could still try to collect, but it would be much harder for him to argue that you specifically owed him anything. The debt would become a marital matter, and those are notoriously difficult to litigate. Vincent and Laura looked at each other. Marriage. They had been falling in love, but they had known each other for less than 2 months. It was fast, maybe too fast. But then again, Vincent had known from the moment he saw Laura on that auction platform that she was going to change his life. Would you be willing to marry me? Vincent asked Laura directly, ignoring the marshal for the moment. I know this is sudden, and I know it's not how anyone dreams of being proposed to. But I love you, Laura. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, whether Cartwright is a threat or not. Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, I'll marry you. Wade cleared his throat. Well then, I'm authorized to perform marriages in my capacity as territorial marshal. If you want to make this official right now, I can do that. Right now? Laura asked. Why wait? If you're sure about each other, getting married today gives Cartwright less time to cause trouble. Vincent squeezed Laura's hand. What do you think? I think life is too short to wait for perfect timing. Let's do it. So Marshal Henry Wade married them right there in his office, with his deputy and his secretary as witnesses. Vincent didn't have a ring to offer, but he took Laura's hand and promised to love her and protect her for the rest of his days. Laura promised the same, her voice steady and clear. When Wade pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed his new bride with a joy so profound it made his chest ache. They left the marshal's office as Mr. and Mrs. Norwood, and Vincent felt like he could take on the world. They stopped by the general store so Vincent could buy Laura a simple gold band to serve as a wedding ring, and the store owner congratulated them warmly. Word would spread fast in a town like Golden, which meant Cartwright would know about the marriage soon. Vincent hoped it would be enough to make the man back off. They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon light, and when they arrived, Vincent swept Laura up in his arms and carried her across the threshold. She laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck, and the sound of her happiness was better than any music. "Welcome home, Mrs. Norwood," Vincent said. "It feels like I've been home since the day you brought me here," Laura replied. "But now it's official." That night, they celebrated their marriage in the privacy of their home. Vincent had worried that Laura might still be carrying trauma from her ordeal, but she came to him with joy and trust, and their joining was everything he had hoped it would be. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Vincent's bed, which was now their bed, and talked about the future. "I want to expand the ranch," Vincent said, stroking Laura's hair. "Make it into something we can pass down to our children someday." "Children," Laura repeated, a smile in her voice. "I like the sound of that. You want children? With you?" "Yes, I want everything with you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Vincent slept more soundly than he had in years. He woke the next morning to find Laura already up and making breakfast, singing softly to herself. He watched her from the doorway for a moment, marveling at how much his life had changed in such a short time. The peace lasted for exactly 3 more days. On the 4th day after their marriage, Vincent was out mending fence when he saw smoke rising from the direction of the house. His heart stopped, and he ran faster than he had ever run in his life. He arrived to find the side of the barn on fire, flames licking up the wooden walls. Laura was already there with buckets of water, trying desperately to put it out. "What happened?" Vincent shouted, grabbing a bucket and joining her efforts. "I don't know. I was inside and I smelled smoke and came running out." They fought the fire together, and eventually they managed to get it under control before it could spread to the house or hurt the animals. But the damage was significant. A whole section of the barn wall was charred and would need to be replaced. Vincent walked around the barn, examining the damage, and found a kerosene-soaked rag near the base of the wall. It hadn't burned completely. Someone had deliberately set this fire. "Cartwright," Laura whispered when he showed her the rag, "probably, or someone working for him." "What are we going to do?" Vincent looked at his wife, at the soot on her face and the fear in her eyes, and felt a cold anger settle in his gut. "We're going to fight back. But we're going to do it smart." He rode into town that same day and went straight to the marshal's office. Wade listened to his report and examined the kerosene rag with a grim expression. "I'll talk to Cartwright. If he's responsible for this, he'll answer for it. And if he denies it, then I'll start investigating. Arson is a serious crime. Norwood. Even Cartwright can't get away with that without consequences." Vincent wanted to believe him, but he had seen too much corruption in his life to have complete faith in the law. Still, Wade seemed like an honest man, and Vincent had to trust someone. Over the next week, Vincent worked on repairing the barn while keeping a careful watch on his property. Laura stayed close to the house, and they both jumped at every unexpected sound. It was no way to live, and Vincent hated that their happiness had been tarnished by Cartwright's vendetta. But then things started to shift. Marshal Wade came by the ranch one afternoon with news. "I talked to Cartwright," he said. "He denied any involvement in the fire, of course. But I also did some digging into his business practices. Turns out there are at least a dozen other people who claim Cartwright manufacturing created fraudulent debts against them. I've been talking to a federal prosecutor, and there's going to be an investigation." Vincent felt a surge of hope. "You think they can make charges stick?" "I think if enough people are willing to testify, yes. And Miss Bennett, I mean Mrs. Norwood, her willingness to speak up has encouraged others to come forward. You might have started something important here." Laura, who had been listening from the porch, came down the steps. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything." "I was hoping you'd say that," Wade said. "The prosecutor wants to meet with you next week." Over the following months, Vincent and Laura found themselves at the center of a legal battle that was bigger than just their personal situation. The federal government was building a case against Cartwright Mining Company for fraud, extortion, and illegal labor practices. Laura testified about her experience, and her testimony was powerful enough that several newspapers picked up the story. Suddenly, Laura wasn't just a victim. She was a symbol of resistance against corporate corruption. Thomas Cartwright fought back hard, using his money and influence to try to discredit the witnesses. But the evidence against him kept mounting. Other victims came forward with similar stories. Records were subpoenaed that showed clear patterns of fraudulent debt creation. By the time autumn arrived and the aspens were turning gold in the mountains, Cartwright was facing federal charges. Vincent and Laura attended the trial, which was held in Denver. It lasted for 2 weeks, and the courtroom was packed every day. Vincent sat beside Laura and held her hand while she gave her testimony, watching her face the man who had tried to sell her with courage and dignity. When the jury returned a guilty verdict, Laura cried with relief, and Vincent held her close. Thomas Cartwright was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, and his company was dissolved. The other victims were offered restitution, and the territorial government implemented new regulations to prevent similar frauds in the future. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was justice of a sort. Vincent and Laura returned to their ranch in late October, and for the first time in months, they felt like they could breathe freely. The barn was fully repaired, the cattle were healthy, and autumn was painting the valley in shades of red and gold. They stood on their porch one evening watching the sun set, and Vincent put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "We did it," Laura said softly. "We actually did it. You did it. You were the one brave enough to stand up and tell the truth. I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me the strength to fight back." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "We gave each other strength. That's what marriage is supposed to be." That winter was the happiest of Vincent's life. He and Laura settled into the rhythms of married life, and the ranch thrived under their joint care. They added more chickens and a few pigs, and Vincent started talking about buying more land. Laura discovered she had a talent for raising vegetables, and she planted a large garden that would provide them with fresh food come spring. On Christmas morning, Laura gave Vincent a gift that changed everything. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach and said, "Merry Christmas. You're going to be a father." Vincent stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. Then joy exploded through him like fireworks. He picked Laura up and spun her around, laughing, and she laughed too, her face radiant with happiness. "Are you sure?" he asked when he finally set her down. "I'm sure. The baby should come in June." Vincent dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against Laura's stomach, as if he could already hear the life growing inside her. "Hello in there," he whispered. "This is your father. I promise I'm going to take care of you and your mother. I promise I'm going to give you a good life." Laura ran her fingers through his hair, and when he looked up at her, there were tears streaming down her face. But they were happy tears, and Vincent stood and kissed them away. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Laura bloomed with health, and Vincent was endlessly fascinated by the changes in her body. He talked to the baby every night, telling it stories about the ranch and the mountains and the life they were building together. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the wood. Laura sewed tiny clothes and blankets, preparing for the arrival with a joy that was infectious. Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1874, almost exactly 1 year after Vincent had first seen Laura on that auction platform. The birth was attended by a midwife from town, and though it was long and difficult, both Laura and the baby came through healthy. Vincent held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. "What should we name him?" Laura asked from the bed, exhausted but glowing. Vincent looked at the tiny face, at the perfect little fingers and the shock of dark hair. "What about Henry, after Marshall Wade? He helped us when we needed it." "Henry Norwood," Laura said, testing the name. "I love it." Baby Henry grew quickly, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Vincent would carry him around the ranch, showing him the horses and the cattle and explaining how everything worked. Laura would laugh and tell Vincent that the baby was too young to understand, but Vincent didn't care. He wanted his son to grow up knowing he was loved and valued. When Henry was 6 months old, Vincent and Laura celebrated their second wedding anniversary. They had a quiet dinner on the porch while the baby slept inside, and they talked about how much had changed in 2 years. "You ever regret it?" Laura asked. "Spending all that money to buy my freedom? You could have used it to expand the ranch or buy better equipment." Vincent reached across the table and took her hand. "I have never regretted it for a single second. You and Henry are worth more than any amount of money. You're my whole world. You saved my life that day. You know that, don't you? If you hadn't stepped in, I don't know what would have happened to me. You would have survived. You're one of the strongest people I know. Maybe, but I wouldn't have lived. There's a difference." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Vincent Norwood. I'm going to love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that. I love you too. More than I ever thought possible." The years flowed by like water. The ranch prospered, and Vincent was able to buy the adjoining property, doubling their land holdings. They added more cattle and horses, and Laura's vegetable garden became famous in Golden. People would come from town specifically to buy her tomatoes and squash, and the preserves she made every autumn. Henry grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around and helping with the ranch work. When he was 4, Laura gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Caroline. She had Laura's delicate features and Vincent's stubborn determination. 2 years after that came another son, whom they named James. The house that had once seemed too big for Vincent alone was now filled with noise and laughter and love. Laura proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and kind but firm when necessary. She taught all 3 children to read and write, using the skills Vincent had taught her. She told them stories at bedtime, some from books and some from her own imagination. And she made sure they knew about the injustices in the world, about the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Vincent taught the children about the ranch, about responsibility and hard work, and treating animals with kindness. He taught them to ride and rope and mend fences. But more than anything, he taught them by example what it meant to be a good person. He showed them how to treat others with respect, how to keep your word, and how to fight for the people you love. On quiet evenings, Vincent and Laura would sit on their porch and watch their children play in the yard, and they would marvel at the life they had built together. Sometimes visitors would come by, people who had heard Laura's story and wanted to thank her for her courage in testifying against Cartwright. Laura always welcomed them warmly and encouraged them to share their own stories. The scandal with Cartwright Mining Company had led to real reforms in Colorado Territory. New laws were passed to protect workers and prevent debt bondage. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than it had been. And Laura took pride in knowing that her willingness to speak up had helped make those changes possible. When Henry was 10 years old, he asked his parents about how they had met. Vincent and Laura looked at each other, silently debating how much to tell him. Finally, Laura decided he was old enough to know the truth. "Your father saved me," she said simply. "I was in trouble and he helped me when he didn't have to. He showed me what real kindness looked like." "What kind of trouble?" Henry asked. "The bad kind." "Some men wanted to hurt me, but your father stopped them. He's the bravest, most honorable man I've ever known." Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, Laura's faith in him still moved him. Henry looked at his father with new respect, and Vincent ruffled his son's hair. "Your mother is pretty brave too. She stood up to some very powerful men and helped change unjust laws." "You're both heroes," Henry declared with the certainty of childhood. "We're just people who did what needed to be done," Laura said. "And that's what I want you and your brother and sister to remember. When you see something wrong, you speak up. You fight back. You don't let fear or convenience stop you from doing what's right." The children took that lesson to heart. As they grew older, all 3 of them showed the same moral courage that had defined their parents' relationship. Henry became a lawyer who specialized in defending workers' rights. Caroline became a teacher who fought for equal education opportunities. James stayed on the ranch with his parents, but became involved in territorial politics, advocating for fair treatment of immigrants and minorities. Vincent and Laura lived to see their children marry and have children of their own. They became grandparents 5 times over, and their house was always full of family during holidays and celebrations. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, and Vincent was able to slow down and enjoy his later years. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Laura on a trip to Denver. They stayed in a nice hotel and saw a play and ate at fancy restaurants. But the most important part of the trip was when Vincent took Laura to a jeweler and bought her a beautiful necklace with a pendant shaped like a heart. 25 years, he said as he fastened it around her neck. And I love you more today than I did the day we met. We've had a good life, Laura said, touching the pendant. Better than I ever imagined possible. Do you remember what you told me that night in the barn, when you kissed me for the first time? I told you I was falling in love with you. You said life was too short and too uncertain to waste time being scared. You were right. Every moment we've had together has been precious. Laura turned and wrapped her arms around him. They were both graying now, with lines on their faces and aches in their joints. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love on a ranch in Colorado. I would do it all again, Laura whispered. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, as long as it was with you. Me too, Vincent said. Always and forever, me too. They returned to the ranch refreshed and happy, and life continued its gentle rhythm. Vincent taught his grandchildren to ride horses the way he had taught his own children. Laura continued her vegetable garden and her preserves, though on a smaller scale now. They spent their evenings on the porch, holding hands and watching the sun set behind the mountains, just as they had done for 25 years. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, Laura said something that made Vincent's heart swell with pride and love. Do you know what I'm most grateful for? Not just that you saved me that day, but that you saw me. Really saw me. Not as property or as someone to be pitied, but as a person with value and dignity. You gave me my life back, Vincent. Everything else, all the joy and love and family, that all came from that first act of seeing me as human. Vincent pulled her close and kissed her temple. You made it easy to see. You were the bravest person on that platform, standing there with your head held high even though you were terrified. I saw strength and courage and beauty, and I knew I had to help you. I just never imagined I would be lucky enough to spend my life with you. Lucky, Laura repeated with a soft laugh. I'm the lucky one. Let's call it even. They sat together as the stars came out, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, and every important moment in between. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the occasional lowing of cattle. Somewhere inside the house, they could hear James and his wife putting their children to bed. The next generation was secure and loved, carrying on the legacy that Vincent and Laura had built together. As Vincent held his wife close, he thought back to that day in 1873 when he had ridden into Golden looking for supplies. He thought about the horror he had felt seeing Laura on that auction platform, and the certainty that had driven him to spend every cent he had to set her free. It had seemed like such a risk at the time, such a leap of faith, but it had turned out to be the best decision he had ever made. He had bought her freedom, yes, but she had given him something infinitely more valuable in return. She had given him love, partnership, family, and purpose. She had made his house a home and his life complete. And every day for 25 years, she had chosen to stay with him, to build a life with him, to love him. That was the real miracle, Vincent thought. Not that he had saved her, but that she had saved him right back. They had rescued each other from loneliness and pain, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. What are you thinking about? Laura asked, sensing his contemplative mood. I'm thinking about how grateful I am. For you, for our family, for every moment we've had together. Even the hard moments, the fire and the trial and all the times we struggled, especially those moments. They showed us what we were made of. They proved that our love could survive anything. Laura nestled closer against his side. I hope our grandchildren find what we have. I hope they understand that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when things are difficult. If they've learned anything from watching us, they'll know that. The years continued to pass, and Vincent and Laura grew old together with grace and contentment. They celebrated their 30th, 35th, and 40th anniversaries, surrounded by children and grandchildren. The ranch remained in the family, a testament to everything they had built. And throughout it all, Vincent and Laura remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with each passing year. When Vincent was 68 years old, he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. Laura nursed him with tireless devotion, helping him relearn how to walk and talk. It was slow, frustrating work, but Vincent fought hard because he wasn't ready to leave Laura yet. He recovered enough to regain most of his mobility, though he moved more slowly and needed a cane. "You're not getting rid of me that easily," he told Laura with a crooked smile. "I should hope not. We still have years left together." And they did. They lived to see their great-grandchildren born. They watched Colorado change from a territory to a state. They saw the ranch grow and prosper under James's careful management. And through it all, they loved each other with the same intensity that had burned between them since that first kiss in the barn. On a warm summer evening in 1903, Vincent and Laura sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were both in their 70s now, white-haired and weathered, but their hands were still entwined. Laura's head rested on Vincent's shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence. "You remember what day it is?" Laura asked softly. "June 28th. 30 years since we got married." 30 years, she repeated. "It doesn't seem possible. It feels like yesterday and forever all at once." Vincent lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Best 30 years of my life, mine too," she sighed contentedly. "I wish we could do it all over again. Every moment. Every single one. Though maybe I'd skip the part where I was sold on an auction block," Vincent chuckled. "Fair enough, though if that hadn't happened, I might never have met you. We would have found each other somehow. We were meant to be together." "You really believe that?" "I do. Some things are written in the stars, Vincent. Our love is one of them." They watched the sun sink below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and gold. Around them, the ranch buzzed with life. Their family had grown large and strong, spreading out across Colorado but always coming back to this place, this home that Vincent and Laura had created together. Vincent felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had lived a good life, a meaningful life. He had fought against injustice, had built something lasting, and had loved with his whole heart. What more could a man ask for? "I love you," he said to Laura, the same words he had spoken countless times over 30 years. "I love you too," she replied, the same answer she always gave. Forever and always. They sat together until the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life full of love and purpose. The cowboy who had seen a woman being sold like cattle and had chosen to intervene. The woman who had been given respect when the world offered her none, and who had turned that gift into a legacy of courage and compassion. Their story was not just their own. It belonged to their children and grandchildren, to the community they had helped make better, to everyone who had been inspired by their example. It was a story about the power of kindness, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the transformative force of love. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, Vincent and Laura finally went inside. They moved slowly, helping each other, comfortable in the rhythms they had established over decades. They prepared for bed together, and they lay down side by side in the bed they had shared for 30 years. "Good night, my love," Laura whispered in the darkness. "Good night," Vincent replied, pulling her close. They fell asleep in each other's arms, two hearts beating in sync, two souls bound together for whatever time remained. And if that sounds like a fairy tale ending, perhaps it was. But it was also the truth. Vincent Norwood had bought Laura Bennett's freedom for $1,000 on a dusty street in Golden, Colorado, and in return, she had given him a lifetime of love. Years continued to bless them both with good health and sharp minds. They lived to see their 75th birthdays and beyond, becoming fixtures in their community. People would come to visit and ask for their advice or simply to hear stories about the old days. Vincent and Laura welcomed everyone with open hearts, sharing their wisdom freely. Their children often asked them what the secret was to such a long and happy marriage. Laura would always answer first. "Respect," she would say. "Your father has treated me with respect from the very first moment we met. He never tried to own me or control me. He saw me as his equal partner." Then Vincent would add, and communication. "We talk about everything, even when it's hard. We don't let resentments fester or problems go unsolved. We face everything together." But the real secret, though they rarely spoke it aloud, was simpler than that. They had chosen each other consciously and deliberately every single day. When things were easy and when they were hard. When they were young and passionate and when they were old and comfortable. They had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, togetherness over solitude. On their 35th anniversary, James organized a huge celebration at the ranch. All three of their children came with their families, and the house and yard were packed with people. There was music and dancing and more food than any one family could eat. Vincent and Laura sat in places of honor, watching their descendants celebrate. Caroline stood up and gave a toast. "To my parents," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "You taught us that love is not just a feeling but an action. You showed us how to fight for what's right, how to treat others with dignity, and how to build something lasting. Everything good in our lives comes from the foundation you laid. We love you both more than words can say." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Vincent felt tears prick his eyes, and he saw that Laura was crying too. They had done well, he thought. Their children were good people, their grandchildren were thriving, and their legacy would live on long after they were gone. The party lasted late into the night, and even after most of the guests had left or gone to bed, Vincent and Laura sat on their porch under the stars. It had become their tradition, this quiet time together at the end of important days. "We did something right," Laura said. "We did everything right. Look at our family. Look at what we built. I never imagined this. When I was standing on that platform, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend whatever years I had left in servitude and misery, and then you appeared like something out of a dream." Vincent took her hand. "I was angry that day. Angry at the world, at the injustice, at the cruelty I saw everywhere. But when I looked at you, I saw hope. I saw someone who refused to be broken. I knew I had to help you. And you did. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Vincent corrected gently. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions but not really living. You gave my life meaning and purpose." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 35 years of marriage, but really closer to 40 years since that day in Golden. 4 decades of shared life, shared struggles, shared triumphs. "You have any regrets?" Laura asked. Vincent considered the question carefully. "I regret that I didn't punch Thomas Cartwright in the face when I had the chance." Laura burst out laughing. "Vincent Norwood, you are supposed to be a dignified elder statesman. You can't say things like that." "Why not? It's true. The man deserved it. He got what he deserved. 10 years in prison and the destruction of his company. That's better than a punch. I suppose, but it would have been satisfying. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. It felt good to laugh, to joke, to be light-hearted. They had faced so many serious things over the years that sometimes the simple joy of laughter was the most precious gift of all. As they aged into their late 70s and early 80s, Vincent and Laura slowed down considerably. They could no longer work the ranch themselves, but they supervised from the porch, offering advice and encouragement to James and his family. They spent their days reading, talking, receiving visitors, and enjoying the peaceful rhythm of life. Laura's garden, which had once been enormous, was now just a small plot near the house where she grew tomatoes and herbs. She tended it with arthritic hands but refused to give it up entirely. "As long as I can still make things grow, I'm not old," she would say stubbornly. Vincent's favorite activity became sitting on the porch with his great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days. He told them about fighting in the war, about buying the ranch, about the day he met their great-grandmother. The children would sit at his feet, wide-eyed and captivated, and Vincent would embellish the tales just enough to make them exciting. One of his great-grandsons, a boy named Thomas, asked him once what the bravest thing he had ever done was. Vincent didn't hesitate. "I spent every cent I had to buy your great-grandmother's freedom. I didn't know if it would work out. I didn't know if she would even want my help. But I knew it was the right thing to do, and I did it anyway." "Were you scared?" Thomas asked, terrified. But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you are scared. Laura, listening from her rocking chair, smiled at him. Even after all these years, hearing him talk about that day still made her heart flutter. He had been her hero then, and he was her hero still. When Vincent was 82 and Laura was 80, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with a small, quiet gathering. Just their immediate family this time, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They sat around the big dining table Vincent had built decades ago, eating Laura's cooking and sharing stories. Henry, now a distinguished lawyer in his 50s, stood to make a toast. "To the best parents a person could ask for, you taught us about justice and compassion and love. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, I owe to you both. Thank you for showing us what a good life looks like." Caroline added, "You showed us that love isn't about perfection. It's about commitment and effort and choosing each other every day. Your marriage has been our guiding star." James, who had inherited Vincent's quiet strength, simply said, "Thank you for trusting me with the ranch. I hope I've made you proud." "You have," Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you have. We couldn't be more proud of the people you've become." That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Vincent and Laura sat together in their bedroom. Vincent was sitting in his chair by the window, and Laura was brushing out her long white hair. They had done this routine thousands of times, and the familiarity of it was comforting. "I've been thinking," Laura said quietly. "About what?" "About how lucky we've been. To have all this time together, to see our family grow, to watch our children become good people. So many couples don't get what we've had." Vincent stood and crossed to her, taking the brush from her hand. He gently brushed her hair, something he had done countless times over the years. "We made our own luck, we worked for it, we fought for it. Every good thing we have, we earned together. Still, I'm grateful." "So am I." He set down the brush and helped her to bed. They lay down together, and Laura curled into Vincent's side the way she had done for 45 years. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close. "Promise me something," Laura whispered. "Anything. When it's time, when one of us has to go, promise me the other one won't give up. Promise me you'll keep living, keep loving our family, keep being you." Vincent felt his throat tighten. It was a conversation they had avoided for decades, but they were both old enough now to face it honestly. "I promise, but only if you promise me the same thing. I promise." They fell asleep holding each other. Two people who had shared a lifetime of love and were prepared to face whatever came next with the same courage they had faced everything else. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 84. Laura woke one morning to find him still and cold beside her, his face relaxed and peaceful. She didn't cry out or panic. She simply lay there with him for a while, holding his hand one last time, memorating every line of his beloved face. When she finally called for help, her children came immediately. They surrounded her with love and support as she faced the hardest day of her life. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Colorado to pay their respects. Vincent had touched many lives with his kindness and integrity, and the church was packed with mourners. Laura gave the eulogy herself, standing straight and strong despite her grief. "My husband was the best man I ever knew," she said simply. "He saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. He respected me when the world treated me as property. He loved me when I thought I was unlovable, and he built a life with me that was fuller and richer than anything I could have imagined. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I am not sad. How can I be sad when I was blessed with 47 years of the most profound love? Vincent gave me everything, and I gave him everything in return. That's all any of us can hope for." True to her promise, Laura didn't give up after Vincent died. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by her family, tending her small garden and spending time with her great-grandchildren. She missed Vincent terribly, but she could feel his presence in everything around her. In the house he had built, in the ranch he had created, in the family they had raised together. She lived for 3 more years, staying sharp and engaged until the very end. She told stories about Vincent to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. And on quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch in her rocking chair, looking out at the mountains, and she would talk to him as though he were still there beside her. "I hope you're proud of me," she would say. "I'm keeping my promise. I'm still here, still living, still loving our family. But I miss you, Vincent. I miss you every single day." Laura passed away peacefully at the age of 83, on a warm summer evening very much like the ones she and Vincent had shared for so many years. Her children were with her, holding her hands and telling her how much she was loved. Her last words were, "Tell Vincent I'm coming home." They buried Laura next to Vincent on a hillside overlooking the ranch. Their headstones were simple but elegant, inscribed with their names and the words "Together Forever." And in the years that followed, their descendants would visit that hillside and tell new generations about the cowboy, who had bought a woman's freedom and the love story that had changed their family forever. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, and later under his children's care. It became a landmark in Colorado, a symbol of what could be built through hard work and love. And every generation that lived there knew the story of Vincent and Laura, the unlikely couple who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had created something beautiful that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. People still talked about them in Golden, about the day Vincent Norwood had paid $1,000 to free a woman from debt bondage, about how they had fought against Cartwright Mining Company and won, about the family they had raised and the legacy they had left. The story became part of local legend, a reminder that one person's courage could change the world. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings, when the stars came out and the crickets sang, people claimed they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old Norwood Ranch. They would be holding hands, watching the sunset, their love transcending even death itself. Whether it was true or just a beautiful story, no one could say for certain. But in a way, it didn't matter. Because Vincent and Laura's love was real and lasting, and it lived on in their descendants, in the ranch they had built, and in the hearts of everyone who had known them. Their story was one of redemption and respect, of courage and compassion, of two people who had saved each other and built a life together against all odds. It was a story of the Wild West, of a time when justice was uncertain and survival was never guaranteed. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple and true. The cowboy had seen her being sold like cattle, had bought her freedom, and had offered her respect. And in return, she had given him everything: her trust, her heart, her life, her love. Together, they had created something that would last forever, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and each other over everything else. And that was the greatest legacy of all.